project. Right? It's empirical project. So therefore, I will start with the methodology, explaining what we have been doing in the past 10 months. And then I'll provide some background on the CARICOM IMPACS, regional security system, and CBSI. I suppose you know all three organizations more or less they are involved in. And then finally some of the research and some recommendations based on findings. So the methodology that we have decided is non-probability sampling. Is because of the small sample size, we decided to interview one person from each military in the Caribbean. Right? As you can see, the grant was major of that was the criteria, inclusion criteria for the interview. So we managed to interview 7 officers from 5 different countries and 2 regional organizations. So CARICOM IMPACS, RSS, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, San Kitts and Nevis, Barbados. So we interviewed the officers from those countries. I mean, not yet. It's difficult right now to interview because of the Venezuela. And 2 retired officers from 2 other countries. So we still hope to conduct 5 more interviews. Perhaps going on now. Who knows? Maybe not now, but next year. And well, we would hope to also interview someone from Cuba. Some of our researchers, some of our interviewees mentioned the importance of Cuba in regional security. So it might be also an opportunity to interview someone from Cuba in the near future. By the feedback on collaboration of Cuba. So the analysis, data analysis was thematic analysis based on the defense diplomacy functions. I will in a moment discuss those functions. We use a software, MaxQBA, to analyze it. And it was data analysis method based on comparison statistics by themes on display.
Excuse
me. So it is a mixed method research. We use categorization in the research where we turn the themes into numeric variables. So 0, 1, performed, not performed, right? So that was a mixed method approach. So that's what we mentioned at the very beginning, the different diplomacies. There are different types of diplomacies. Some of them I'm sure you're very familiar examples. Definitely like sport diplomacy, we discussed the ping-pong diplomacy between the States and China during the Cold War. It's an example of sport diplomacy. We have the celebrity diplomacy is frequently implemented by the United Nations. They are asking the celebrities, movie stars, represent the United Nations in different conflict zones. So it is being implemented, right? So our focus is on the military diplomacy and defense diplomacy. So the difference between both is very small. They are very similar in terms of focus. So military diplomacy is military to military cooperation in a non-violent way. So joint exercises, training, exchanging of officers in different academies. So this is the type of diplomacy, military diplomacy. Defense diplomacy is more broader in terms of scope because it's also involving defense civilians. in collaboration and interaction with the military officials and stakeholders. But in reality, both types of diplomacies are very, very similar to each other. And you have some examples of regional organizations that certain degree implemented the defense diplomacy. So you have, for example, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which was initiated in 1996, but took security mandate through defense diplomacy in 2001. You have, of course, NATO, right? Established in 1949, and from the very beginning it was a security organization, right? So some organizations were established as a security organizations. Other organizations, they took the security, they developed the security mandate years later for establishment. So, for example, you have Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe. It was mainly focused on socio-economic development during the Cold War period, but in 1996 also focused a little bit on security element within the Europe as well. And so some organizations are evolving and expanding the scope of focus of the mandate. So in case of the Caribbean region, we decided basically to combine the military and defense diplomacy for Caribbean region for several reasons. First of all, most of the Caribbean military is small, basically, right? Excluding Dominican Republic and Cuba, which are large armed forces, or other countries, it's basically 5,000, around 1,500. So it's a very small number of armed forces. And some of the countries in the Caribbean have no military at all. So St. Lucia, Grenada, St. Vincent and Grenadines, Montserrat, they don't have the military. And only quite recently it was Cayman Islands that developed, established a regime. And it's something new last year that was established. But majority of the countries in the Caribbean are either very small in terms of the military component or non-existent, basically. So therefore it doesn't make sense to focus on military diplomacy only and defense diplomacy only. It's better to combine both functions as an analytical unit. And another reason why it's better to combine both, this is based on the findings, the interviews. The interviewees identified security threats in the region. And as you can see, basically there's nothing in terms of traditional military security. Right? We have transnational organized crime, like human weapons and drugs trafficking. You have climate change, energy security, food security, corruption, migration. It's not traditional. It's not traditional security. It's non-traditional security that the military in Caribbean are facing. So again, it doesn't make sense from the Caribbean perspective to distinguish between the military diplomacy and defense diplomacy. Better to combine the two as a one comprehensive concept. It's only two interviewees mentioned report. So it's a very small component of the Caribbean region, very small box. And this is another example, just to illustrate again the threat the interviews has mentioned. So here you have the interviewees, and in here you have how frequently they mention certain threats. So for example, you have a transnational organized crime, which has been mentioned very frequently by every single interviewee. Right? Another aspect was non-traditional security, like energy security, food security. Terrorism also was mentioned a few times. So this is another illustration of how the militaries in the Caribbean region perceive security threat in the region. Definitely transnational organized crime is the absolute focus at the core, the center of the security of the region right now. So based on this introduction of the functions and threats, we decided to focus on three organizations, on three structures basically, which you have the CARICOM, IMPACS, RSS, and CBSI. So first is CARICOM IMPACS, CARICOM, and then CARICOM IMPACS. Right? This is very important actually to understand the findings. The background will provide a lot of understanding for the findings. So for example, CARICOM IMPACS, CARICOM was established in 1973, right? And its focus was mainly on assurance and prevention. So development of democratic institutions within the Caribbean countries, on reducing poverty, nation building, confidence building measures, right? So that was the main focus of the CARICOM from the very beginning. It was not security. Security was just ad hoc arrangement. There's a problem, then we react to it. It is only in 2006, based on the 9/11 terrorist attacks, that CARICOM countries decided to establish Caribbean Community Implementation Agency for Crime and Security. Only in 2006, security became important component, integral to the CARICOM countries. And it is only then the protection and compliance become the focus of CARICOM as well. But something new, it's only 14, 15 years maybe, that security become a fourth pillar of the Caribbean. And it's still there are a lot of challenges in terms of implementation of the security, the fourth pillar, and the findings will explain it later on why is it so challenging to implement security policies by CARICOM IMPACS. So this is very important distinction to understand why security is a challenging component of the CARICOM countries in terms of implementation. Because it has not been part of the CARICOM from the very beginning. Only recently was that. Then you have a CBSI, a Caribbean Basin Security Initiative. It's not an organization, it's an initiative by the United States with the objective of countering transnational criminal organizations and increasing the security of the Caribbean states. That's the general objective. And this objective is then divided into three other smaller targets or objectives, which is reducing illicit trafficking, advancing public safety and security, and promoting social justice. But if you take a look into deeper into the documents, United States documents like National Security Strategy, Joint Strategic Plan, and Joint Regional Strategy, all those objectives are basically focusing on the United States. CBSI, although claims to support the development of Caribbean countries, everything they are doing is basically focusing on the safety and security of the United States. Right? The famous, the third border, right, with Caribbean. So although they support, they provide a lot of money into the Caribbean, in reality it's to uphold the interest of the United States. And so they, as I mentioned, they provide a lot of financial support. Well, it depends how you define a lot, right? This is like 60, 70 million per year. So it's kind of a lot. And as you can see, the trend is increasing in terms of contributions. And then you have here, you can see there was a decrease. It was the Trump area. When the Trump was the president, it was a decrease in financial support of the CARICOM region. But it's only quite recently that the financing increased under Biden. And it is estimated that in 2024 this will actually decrease again because of all the other commitments the United States have, for example, Ukraine and Russia, right? So this might be also decreasing. The major contributors, benefactors for the CBSI is Dominican Republic and Jamaica. So those are the major benefactors. And the last structure that we decided to focus is the regional security system. I suppose this is the least familiar organization for many reasons, because it's very small. It consists of 8 countries right now. Guyana is a recent addition to the regional security system in 2022. So they expanded only quite recently. And it's important expansion considering what is happening right now with Venezuela. But what is important and what is different between regional security system and CARICOM is that the regional security system had protection and compellent the security component from the very, very beginning of its existence in 1982. It was focused on security from the very beginning. And you have a lot of examples how the RSS countries contributed to different missions, right? You have the Urgent Foray in Grenada. RSS participated in it. You had the St. Vincent Operation 2007 eradicating drought. You had different relief operations after hurricanes. You had operations, civil stability operations, social stability operations, like prison uprisings in some cases, Barbados and St. Lucia. So this is a very experienced organization in tackling security challenges in the past 40, 50 years, compared to CARICOM IMPACS, which is very important to understand later on the findings, why the interviewees were saying things they were saying about RSS and of course, you never know what will happen now with Guyana. It is very important that there is a military assistance on request. So technically, Guyana request an assistance. Those countries should be able to support Guyana in case of any conflict with Venezuela. So it will be very interesting what will happen right now in terms of Guyana. But it's good to remember that it is an organization that is expanding. Right? So it's not an old organization static that is slowly dying. No. This expansion in Guyana is showing that RSS is an active organization. So based on this introduction, we have identified several military and defense diplomacy functions. This is not all of them, there are many more actually, but that's what we identified as the core for our research. So you have typically military functions like joint operations, joint procurement, territorial support. It's more typical military type of function. And then you have also defense diplomacy functions like officer exchanges, promoting agency collaboration with the police, law enforcement, intelligence sharing, capacity building and development. So that's the functions that we decided to focus to determine which structure is performing those functions and which structure is not performing and why. Right? And that's the findings. So I will discuss them in more detail in a moment, but it gives a big picture of all 3 structures. So you have the function, right? Here you have the structures, CBSI, RSS, CARICOM, IMPACS. 1, 0, that's what I mentioned. It's 1 means it's performing, 0 it's not performing the function. And then you have how many interviewees mentioned. So for example, in terms of reinforcing the perception, 4 interviewees mentioned that CBSI is not performing this function. So basically it's showing like overall summary of the findings. I'll give you a minute maybe to take a look into the table and maybe you'll find some patterns or something interesting and we can provide a feedback if you wish. Is there something surprising for you in this table? Not really. So to repeat the functions, you have 0 not performed, 1 performed, and how many interviewees mentioned.
For example, men's variables CBSI functions because it covers functions that CBSI.
It's not, yes. That's definitely in CBS. Where there's a 0 in CBSI, it's only.
That is important because we can conclude that the main interest of CARICOM countries that are members of our ISRI have interest and have difference in the interest respecting the US.
Yes, yes, because CBSI will be US supports initiated. Yeah, that's a good observation. Yes. Anything else? So I will briefly discuss some of the functions, but before that, it's actually what was surprising one of the findings. Well, interview A mentioned that all Caribbean countries are sharing the mindset, security mindset. And basically, in one way or another, all interviewees mentioned that Caribbean countries are sharing the security mindset. But one thing is to share the mindset, another thing is actually to collaborate effectively on security challenges and security issues. So one of the interesting findings is that collaboration, the word collaboration, as you can see, it was not that frequently mentioned. If you can imagine, you are talking to someone for 1 hour and a half, around. Each interview was 1 hour and a half, 2 hours was the longest. You are talking with the person, and the focus is on collaboration. What would be the frequency of the word collaboration? It would be quite frequent, isn't it? But in reality, you can see that interview 8 to 9 basically mentioned it only 10, 16 times, basically, in 1 hour and a half conversation. Collaboration, although they mention it several times, they mention shared mindset of responsibility, but collaboration, the word itself was not at the core of the interviews. Yeah, and so that's the reason why we are preparing right now a paper with a subtitle divided together. Because on one hand they are together, there is shared mindset, but on the other hand collaboration is not at the core based on these interviews. So they are divided together. And this division is represented through those functions that you saw in the previous table, right? All those functions on the left side. Some of them, there's a clear agreement between the interviewees that which org structure is performing, which one is not performing, and that's perfectly fine. There are also functional overlaps. So both, or all three or all two organizations are performing it, but it is not clear the division of responsibilities. And then you have functional gaps, which the functions are not being performed at all, for example. So that was like a structure, the framework, the vertical framework we used to analyze the findings of the functions. So for example, I know that's a lot of text. I really don't like personally to put a lot of text, but that's the type of data we are dealing with. So, agreements. Interviewees agreed on joint procurement, intelligence sharing, and hosting multilateral meetings. They all agreed that the joint procurement is something that is existing within the RSS. They have Article 16 within the treaty that allows for joint procurement of equipment, military equipment. They also agreed that CARICOM IMPACS is not performing this function at all, which is interesting because CARICOM IMPACS should be within the fourth pillar responsible for procurement of equipment that is needed to perform the fourth pillar of security, but it is not. That is the RSS, Regional Security System, the smaller one, that has something more advanced in terms of the security development. Another one is intelligence sharing. Again, there's a certain level of agreement between the interviewees that it is the CARICOM IMPACS through the Regional Intelligence Fusion Center that is providing the intelligence for the military in the region. It is not regional security system. They had a fusion center back in the 80s and 90s, their own fusion center for collecting intelligence and sharing intelligence, but they decided that there is overlap, significant overlap between their fusion center and the fusion center of the CARICOM IMPACS after 2006. And therefore they decided to avoid the duplication and transfer the responsibility to CARICOM IMPACS. And as you can see, most of the interviewees agreed that this fusion center, intelligence fusion center, is very successful, very useful tool for all CARICOM countries, member states, providing very useful information most of the day. And the last agreement is hosting meetings between the countries. Again, CBSI is doing it. There are different type of conferences, meetings, experts, together with the United States, and CARICOM IMPACS have different meetings between the military chiefs. Right? So they are meeting and discussing policy, security issues. Interestingly, RSF was not mentioned, but there is no need for it, basically because CARICOM IMPACS is organizing it. So that's the only three agreements that the interviewees identified, those functions, those three functions that the interviewees identified as a more or less clear distinction which organization, which structure is performing and which is not. That's about it. So out of 16 functions, I believe, only 3, in case of 3, there is agreement. So now overlap, or functional overlap. Overlap means that some policies or functions or that they overlap between 2 or more structures. And this is a problem. This is a problem for several reasons, and the 3 reasons I mentioned in here. It can cause non-compliance with norms of the organization, of the structure. So a very good example is financial contribution of member states to the structures. The member states are not contributing on a regular basis, non-compliance. Because the member states have to financially support RSS, financially support CARICOM IMPACS. And so that's a problem, non-compliance. Institutional ineffectiveness. It can cause institutional ineffectiveness. If two organizations or three organizations are doing the same thing and they are not communicating, it will cause at one point or another ineffectiveness in implementation of those functions. And competitive regionalism. Competition between the organizations, it's our responsibility, not your responsibility, right? Don't engage in our functions, right? Competition between the structures, which is unnecessary and is causing problems in terms of implementations of the functions. So functions where you have the overlap. This is actually very interesting, the first two functions where there is overlap. It's development of policies in the field of defense and security. So what we have in common here is that CBSI, two interviewees mentioned that it is not performing the function of developing of policies. RSS, it is quite clear that it is performing this function. 5 interviewees out of 9 agreed on that. And CARICOM IMPACS, again, very interesting finding. 4 interviewees agreed that the CARICOM IMPACS is performing this function well, and 2 agreed that it's not performing. So they have a disagreement on the role of CARICOM IMPACS on the development of policies in the security, which is a problem. And we have in here, in case of RSS interviewee 2 mentioned that they have a lot of ideas, a lot of initiatives in terms of the policies. In case of CARICOM IMPACS, one interviewee mentioned that they have the procedures, there is the sharing of knowledge, sharing of best practices, but on the other hand, the 4th pillar, security, as you can see, is left as the last thing when they are meeting actually and considering the policies. So on one hand, they are sharing the knowledge, on the other hand, it's not that important as other pillars. So that's the reason this disagreement between performing and not performing the function. And CBSI, well, it's not necessarily performing because CBSI is not designed to develop the policies. CBSI is designed to financially support other countries in development of policies. Right? So that's pretty much clear. Reinforcing perception of common interest. It should be normal, right? The point of organization is to share and develop the common interest in order to advance the security of those countries. And again, here, CBSI not performing it at all. RSS, it is clear it is performing the reinforcement of perception. And CARICOM IMPACS, which again is certain level of disagreement whether it's performing or not performing. So for example, RSS, it's a very interesting statement by interviewee 7 that the RSS is most familiar and most tailored to their needs, to the country needs, of the security needs. So it's a very important statement because this interview is a country from member state of both organizations, and yet the smaller organization is more important than the bigger one, the one that is more recognized internationally. We have this that I mentioned, assurance and mutual responsibility, mutual security of space, which of course will be very interesting in case of Guyana, how they will actually understand the mutual responsibility in case of conflict between Venezuela and Guyana. In case of CARICOM, there's no unity. Right? Interviewee 4 mentioned that CARICOM countries, when they are going to United Nations, they are not representing one single position. Be it security, be it other socio-economic issues, whatever. Right? But this was in security in this case. Right? They are not representing one front, which CARICOM should be doing, finding the common ground. CBSI, Again, it is centered on, as I mentioned at the very beginning in the introduction, it's centered on United States. And that's the reason why they have this one-size-fits-all approach. Which is, of course, a problem, because Caribbean is a very diversified region. North countries have different security needs than the South countries. So CBSI is not recognizing this, the uniqueness of the Caribbean region. And therefore, well, it's not reinforcing the common interest. Capacity building and development. That's actually another interesting overlap in terms of all structures performed. CBSI, RSS, and CARICOM IMPACS, all of them perform to a certain degree the development, the capacity building and development, like sharing knowledge, helping each other, replacing the equipment, assisting in the building of the equipment, the capacity. Now, it seems that this is not a problem overall. I mean, it's good everyone is developing the capacity. But in reality, as I mentioned, in this I would just like to highlight the funding, right? Every organization, every structure needs funding in order to build the capacity of the country. And this is a problem, how to fund it, right? All interviewees, every single interviewee mentioned that there is not enough funding in the structure. So how do you develop a capacity across three structures if there's not enough funding? So that's a significant problem of overlapping functions, where there is no communication between the structures on how to share this development of capacity in different countries or different structures. There's no communication. And that's a problem of distribution of financing and funding. In terms of the gaps, one of the gaps mentioned basically by all interviewees at one point or another is joint exercises. I mean, all interviewees mentioned the most important joint exercise, the military exercise in the region, is the trade winds. The trade winds mentioned across all interviewees, and this is the biggest military exercise in the region supported by United States. However, interviewees mentioned that, well, it is designed by United States, it is supported by United States, so it does not necessarily reflect the needs, security needs of the countries in the region. And that's the reason why, for example, RSS have their own smaller exercise. It's called Unity, where they are preparing together for the exercise trade winds. Right? So they actually get more experience based on their own preparation before this big exercise supported by United States. And it was also highlighted several times that that's the reason why urban countries should have their own unique military exercise only for urban countries, not supported, not led by United States, because the needs are different. So that's a gap. There's no exercise basically across Caribbean without United States. Territorial support. So whenever there's an emergency, some sort of security challenge, countries can contribute their forces to send to this country, just like RSS did in case of Grenada, in case of the prison uprisings I mentioned at the beginning. And it's not an issue in case of RSS. Right? They exchange and support each other all the time whenever there's a need. And the interviewee 5 highlighted in the case of Hurricane Maria that impacted Dominica some years ago. immediately all the member states of the RSS, so you have St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Grenada, Barbados, they immediately reacted and sent the support to Dominica based on the mutual assistance treaty. It is later on that all the CARICOM countries joined the support, like Trinidad, Tobago, Jamaica, and Belize. And so the interviewee 5 is highlighting that RSS is reacting immediately when needed, when there's a need for territorial support, while CARICOM IMPACS, it's lagging behind because there is nothing in terms of dysfunction for CARICOM IMPACS to perform it effectively. One very interesting finding is defense industry cooperation. It's not existing in the Caribbean region. It's not existing at all. No defense industry. However, interviewee from time to time mentioned that there is a need for facility that are fixing the vessels, fixing the boat, for example. There is a need for facility that is producing the equipment, small equipment, gloves, bullets, for example. In this case, the interviewee form mentioned that it's very difficult to buy bullets because the big producers of the bullets for weapons internationally are not interested in selling small amount to one single country. But if there would be some sort of center facility producing the bullets in Caribbean, perhaps, it would be much more easier to get the equipment faster. So that's another significant gap, the lack of defense industry. So other challenges mentioned by interviewees, as I mentioned, in terms of performing the functions, right? Budget, that's what I already mentioned. There is also a problem of bureaucracy, especially in case of CARICOM IMPACS. It's a larger organization, many countries, different interests, extremely difficult to find common bureaucracy. Trust, that was actually quite interesting that 2 or 3 interviewees mentioned there is no trust between member states in developing and supporting each other, which is interesting, considering that CARICOM IMPACS should be the organization that is building trust among the member states. Yeah, there's also other issues like structures that are too big, too slow in reacting to the security challenges. And interviewees also identified the areas of collaboration that need further support. Actually, I'm very happy to see that because all interviewees basically pointed out that there's a need for more analysis, more research. So as a researcher, I'm very glad to see that they identify need for research as a way to further support the collaboration, security collaboration in the region. Right? Other aspects they perceive as the functions that need to be improved is optimized use of resources. There's a need for political will to make a difference, to make a change, for example, joint procurement of equipment. This is a political will, basically, organization. And that's our recommendation, actually, initial recommendation based on the findings. So what we basically recommend is that RSS should continue the expansion. So they expanded into Guyana, and they should continue the expansion in other Caribbean countries. However, it should not be a collective, one huge collective. It should be divided into North, South, and Central Command in order to division of responsibilities for each region, because as I mentioned, CBSI is not that effective because it's one policy fitting all countries. There's no diversity. So therefore, because the northern countries and southern countries are a little bit different, they have different security needs, the RSS, upon expansion, should have this kind of different command at least in order to focus on each sub-region specifically. We also based on that recommend that RSS should focus on the operational and tactical defense diplomacy. So RSS should be the muscle, the military muscle which is executing the missions like it did so far in the past, as in the case of Grenada or St. Vincent. They are the ones who are sending the troops. And CARICOM should focus on the strategic level, so the big picture, developing the policies, reinforcing common interests, building capacity of all countries. This should be the focus of the CARICOM impact. So more soft power and RSS should be more the hard power approach in this division of responsibilities. And while CBSI will be doing whatever they want with the United States, but it should focus on capacity building and hosting the meetings, forums in the member states. And so that's our initial recommendation. As I mentioned, it's based on 9 interviews. We are hoping to conduct 5 more interviews, so we have more robust findings in the future. One of the countries we hope maybe to have someone interviewed is from Cuba, because some of the countries, some of the interviewees mentioned that Cuba is an important potential partner in the future for ensuring regional security. So Cuban perspective might be also very useful in having the interview. Guyana, we also hope to have Guyana, perhaps also Venezuela, although it's not member state of any of this organization, but the perspective of Venezuela is perceiving the regional security development might be also extremely useful information for this type of research. We also hope to interview perhaps someone from the United States military. We haven't done so yet. And perhaps maybe someone from China, because the role of China in bringing is increasing. So it will be also good to have a Chinese perspective on the regional security. But basically that's it. So that's the empirical findings, initial findings of the research. And well, if you have any questions, I'm more happy to answer.